As week 14 of the fantasy football season wraps up and we head towards the playoffs, which waiver wire pickups should you be targeting? Which injuries do you need to know about? And who are the key replacements? Let's find out. Welcome back to the Fantasy Endgame. I'm Pierre, here to help you with some waiver wire pickups. But first, let's get down to business. A lot of big injuries in week 14, and let's start with probably the most significant, not just in terms of its impact, but also probably the longest term injury. That would be Deebo Samuel. Well, I guess you could look at it one of two ways. If you're a 49ers fan, you could be thankful because they're saying that he avoided what they would consider a serious injury, meaning not going to be something that completely ends his season. But it effectively ends his fantasy season because if it's a high ankle sprain, which is what has been suggested so far, that basically knocks him out 4 to 6 weeks, which is the rest of the fantasy football season. So you're going to be without Deebo. Well, we saw Brandon Ayuk now become a little bit more relevant. We're worried about him with Brock Purdy in this offense now. There's a lot of mouths to feed. Well, take one away. That means Ayuk should be startable pretty much from here on out. George Kittle, I don't know. It still didn't really benefit that much, but it's tight end. You don't have a lot of better options. Let's just say at least this offense is a little easier to figure out at this point. And then some big ones in Cincinnati. T. Higgins registered nothing in the box score because he left early with a right hamstring injury. You know how that goes. Can be tricky, even for a minor hamstring. Could cost him a week or two, and hopefully it's nothing more significant. So right now, you got to be worried that one of the top receivers, the guy that we have as a no-brain must-doubt every single week, might not be playing just when the playoffs start for a lot of you. And to make things worse, Tyler Boyd, who could be the beneficiary, he also left the game with a dislocated finger. And you know what? Boyd really had been doing nothing, did nothing in this game as well. Even with Jamar Chase out for multiple weeks, Boyd just has to be dropped at this point now that he's hurt as well. On the running back front, well, Dameon Pierce finally had a decent game, had a touchdown, 78 yards. Not that he was terribly efficient, averaging fewer than 4 yards per carry. But man, game script somehow worked in his favor. But what didn't work in his favor is the fact that he had an ankle injury late in that game. Didn't sound too severe, but again, this is a running back, and you really don't know how these things will play out. So watch his status throughout the week for practice and see how he is. If he's out, you'd think Rex Burkhead would be the go-to guy, but really, Dare Ogunbowale has been the guy who's filled in mostly. Benjamin is there. They obviously picked him up as soon as he was cut by the Cardinals. But in reality, there is no replacement here because even Pierce hadn't been that great until this game, which was even, honestly, without that touchdown, pretty mediocre. So there is nobody you really need to worry about pivoting to in the Houston backfield. And a lot of people wondering, is Jeff Wilson startable based on how he did last week? It was a good spot for him against the Chargers. Well, going forward, I think it's safe to say, not going to have to worry about that. He left this game with a hip injury, so it sounds like Raheem Mostert will be the guy. Is Raheem Mostert a must-add? No, he didn't really do that great in this game either against what has been a pretty bad Chargers run defense so far, and you just got to be worried about this Miami offense in general after 2 straight weeks struggling. A lot of the blame lies on the fact that offensive line has had some injuries at both tackle positions. So, again, Jeff Wilson, it seems at this point, is also droppable. And then as far as quarterbacks, we had several starters go out, most of them with concussions, and that begins with Russell Wilson. Just when it looked like maybe he's back, had his best game as a Bronco, actually threw some touchdowns, 3 of them to be exact, all to Jerry Jeudy, and then he left with a concussion. So very much in doubt whether he'll play next week. A lot of money tied to him, and so the team that definitely not making the playoffs probably will err on the side of caution. So Russell Wilson, if you had now suddenly become interested in starting him, probably going to have to plan to not do that this coming week. And another one that's probably more significant in real life than in fantasy, but look, some people were going with Mike White, who's been putting up some yardage, has some good receivers there. Well, he took a brutal hit early in that game, stayed in, took another shot, and finally left. And not just that he left the game, but he actually went to the hospital, got a rib injury. This is something that's definitely concerning. It's too early to say whether this is going to keep him out long term, but it seems like there's a good chance he's not playing at least this coming week. I mean, obviously in some pain there. So Joe Flacco, probably. I mean, we're hoping it's not Zach Wilson. You can't rule anything out at this point. But Flacco was the guy who came in relief of White, and obviously Zach Wilson was not even active. I find it hard to believe that Zach Wilson will just all of a sudden be the starter again, but you never know. So I would say Flacco in a super flex league could be viable. And I think this actually doesn't hurt Garrett Wilson at all. Because remember, early in the year, those first couple of weeks when Garrett Wilson had big numbers, it was with Joe Flacco. So I don't think it really makes too big a difference. And there's one other receiver that might actually benefit that I'll talk about later. And if things weren't bad enough for the Ravens with Lamar Jackson out for a while, and now that backup Tyler Huntley also out, he left the game against the Steelers really early on with a concussion, and they're down to their third string quarterback, Anthony Brown. So yeah, Huntley, again, you know how concussions go. The team will be cautious. This team needs to fight to make the playoffs, right? So they can't afford to take it too easy, but yeah, they're not going to be able to rush a guy through the concussion protocol. Every player is different. So right now, looking 50-50 whether Huntley even plays in Week 15. And then the same goes for Kenny Pickett. Only threw one pass and got hit. You know, a little wobbly coming off, so he left, and we retreated to Mitch Trubisky back again for a full game, and he promptly threw 3 interceptions. I will say, even though Pickett hadn't put up big numbers, he was getting better. He was cutting down on the interceptions. He was at least getting the ball in the hands of his playmakers, especially guys like Pat Freiermuth. Deontay Johnson had been coming on. So if it's back to Trubisky, this kind of hurts the whole offense in general, especially those 2 receivers, George Pickens and Deontay Johnson. All right, time for the waiver wire pickups, and I think we are obligated to start with J.K. Dobbins. You know how this goes. Look, I'm not a big fan of Dobbins in general for fantasy. Chris, same thing. We didn't draft him. We're not picking him up. And yes, we were wrong about him this week. He played immediately. It was not just a starter, but all the carries basically that he could handle coming off of another injury after a year removed from ACL injury. Look, he was a beast. There's no denying it. 120 yards on the ground and a touchdown. And he gets the Browns next week. And so that's the thing. If you're going to roll with a guy like Dobbins, this is the time to roll with him. They allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to running backs. All right. Now, you know what you're getting yourself into, just the same as last time, where after a couple of weeks, you know, he was huge his first game being active this year earlier, and then down, and then hurt. Don't necessarily assume he's going to go off next week, even though it is a smash spot. You've got to wonder, if the Ravens are down to their 3rd string quarterback, is that going to make this offense better in terms of the running game because they're just going to feed their running backs like Dobbins more? Does that mean we're going to see a huge output for him? Or is it going to hurt the whole offense in general because, well, the defense won't really be surprised. They're not going to really have to respect this passing game, which has been bad enough already. We'll see how it goes. But look, it's obvious that Dobbins is worth picking up. And if you're hurting at your RB2 spot or you need a flex with some upside, yeah, I can't deny that he's got that. And another running back who has shown now what he's capable of is Jerick McKinnon. So you hate to go out and chase points from last week, a guy that has been out there all season and not really rostered in too many fantasy teams because he just hasn't really done enough to warrant putting in lineups. Well, he did plenty in week 14. 6 carries for 22 yards on the ground. Like, so what? 7 catches for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. That'll get your attention. Now, this is obviously not how we expected things to go against Denver. Didn't think Denver would actually score enough points to make the Chiefs have to put the foot on the gas pedal. Didn't think that the Broncos defense would give up so much to either a running back or a receiver, but Jerick McKinnon, look, we know what he can do. He's obviously been a guy that is in the fantasy consciousness because he's an extremely good athlete. He's on the Chiefs offense, which always gives him upside. I don't know that I can guarantee he'll be this involved going forward on a weekly basis, but you can't rule it out either. All right, so McKinnon is a guy that is clearly worth picking up in full PPR leagues. As a running back, having that floor of a guy who can catch passes, that's pretty nice. Now, if you're looking for help at wide receiver, there's actually a couple of interesting options out there, and you might be still able to find on your waiver wire Donovan Peoples-Jones. Now, Peoples-Jones has been pretty up and down throughout this season and really his early career. He'll show up with a huge game and then kind of disappear for a while. Well, this was one of his huge games, had 8 catches for 114 yards. Meanwhile, Amari Cooper, was kind of limited with a hip injury, only had 2 catches for 42 yards. Well, what's interesting about this is only Deshaun Watson's second game. His first game in Houston really didn't do anything, and they really didn't need to throw the ball at all. Well, he had to throw the ball 42 times in this game against Cincinnati, and the guy who got the most targets was DPJ. Now, is there a guarantee that that's going to be the case going forward? No. If Cooper's back to 100% health, of course, he's definitely going to be more involved. David Njoku, great tight end, he's there. But Peoples-Jones, he's a guy who's always been intriguing because he's got speed, he can get down the field, he's got length, he's got really great hands, and he's good with the ball in his hands. So now he's got a quarterback that can actually get him the ball and is looking his way. Well, color me interested. And look, I thought he was a sneaky flex option this week. Well, he's not going to be a sneaky next week, but he's got even better matchups in terms of Baltimore and then New Orleans the next couple of weeks. So DPJ, definitely somebody worth chasing. And I think we have to now talk about Chris Moore of the Texans. You probably weren't too interested in any Texans receivers this week, and I can't blame you because they got the Cowboys. Well, that game did not go as we expected. But here's the thing. Chris Moore had huge output, 10 catches for 124 yards. You have to be interested in the fact that we know Brandon Cooks is set for a multi-week injury. Very doubtful he'll play next week. Nico Collins, it's going to be a little touch and go there. Maybe he comes back next week, maybe he doesn't. Chris Moore now is going to be a starter. He's established himself clearly as one of their top targets. And Davis Mills is back at quarterback, which doesn't sound like a great reason to get too excited, but at least it's not Kyle Allen. And look, if Dameon Pierce winds up being hurt, as I mentioned earlier, they're going to have to rely on the passing game more. And I think they're going to have to rely on the passing game quite a bit next week anyways because they get the Chiefs. So we could see a lot of pass attempts going toward the way of guys like Chris Moore. So more of an under-the-radar play. He's not a guy that you want to force into your lineup. But don't be surprised if he puts up big numbers yet again. I talked about the Mike White injury. We could see Joe Flacco back behind center. Well, you know what? That's not a bad thing for the passing offense, and you know who could benefit is Elijah Moore. So Elijah Moore, they were saying how he's back a couple weeks ago because he actually scored a touchdown. He only got 2 targets that game, right? Mike White was there. And only 2 targets again the week after. He had not really been doing anything to make us interested in him in fantasy. But this week, he actually did. He had 10 targets, 6 catches for 60 yards. Not huge numbers, but still, 10 targets, that's definitely something that you should be looking at when you're looking for guys who have upside on the waiver wire. We know Elijah Moore's talent is there. And look, with Joe Flacco, this actually makes him more appealing because there is more of a history and chemistry with Flacco from last year. Not anything too deep, not going crazy about this, but still, we know Flacco can get him the ball. We know Flacco will sling the ball. Elijah Moore, especially because you might not have known this, but Corey Davis also left the game with a head injury. Look, if Corey Davis is out, Elijah Moore could clearly see a lot of targets again. So I'm interested in Elijah Moore. I'm not going to assume that this is some salvation for him down the stretch after it's been really a disappointing season. But he has been coming on, and now we could see him getting even more action. And then as you make your playoff run, you can never have too many handcuffs at running back. You need those high-end backups. Well, now I think is the time to say that Jordan Mason is one of those guys. Not just that he's clearly the number 2 behind Christian McCaffrey, which in and of itself makes him appealing, but he's been really good with the chances, limited, of course, that he's gotten. But if you look how he's done, he's averaging 5.27 yards per carry. This is a guy who's actually getting chunks of yardage. You think with Brock Purdy in there at quarterback, this is a team that's going to rely on the running game, as they have the last 2 weeks more and more. With Debo being out, we'll take those rushing attempts away, take away those short passes, and you see a lot more action is going to be toward the running backs, especially CMC, of course. So Jordan Mason, you're hoping Christian McCaffrey makes it through the season, whether you have him or not, but you want to be prepared if that doesn't happen. Mason doesn't quite yet have standalone value, but he's done well, and he's somebody you definitely want as an insurance policy if you have CMC, and even if you don't, it wouldn't hurt to stash him. And then finally, let's get a little deeper here. If you need someone to fill in for, I don't know, let's say a T. Higgins because he might be out, or you're just looking for a deep sleeper, how about Trenton Irwin? That's right, Trenton Irwin, the receiver from the Bengals that you'd never heard of. Well, of course, he caught that 48-yard touchdown. You might have seen the highlights this past week. But again, what if Higgins and Boyd are out this week? And then you're looking at him possibly being number 2 in line because Hayden Hurst, the tight end, has also been an out. Jamar Chase can only catch so many passes. Irwin has shown he has speed, he has the ability to get open. Obviously, they like him enough that they're throwing him out there onto the field already. So this is a guy, wouldn't be surprising if he actually caught several passes. He's only been used as a deep threat at this point, but they might have to rely on him. So this is going to be a deep league special, obviously, but Trenton Irwin, not the worst of plays. I'd rather have a guy attached to Joe Burrow in the Cincinnati offense than any receiver from, let's say, a New England or a team like that. All right, that's your weekly waiver wire help. Good luck, and of course, we're here to help you with everything you need to win in the playoffs, and that starts with our Week 15 playlist, start-sit advice for every position, waiver wire advice, and more. Check it out.